Hi, welcome to the video. This is a video on building a live edge desk. I started off by traveling around and locating a slab. I got a kiln-dried slab of black walnut about 2.5 inches thick, and it was rough sawn, so I had to level it somehow. And there's a couple of ways to do that. You can do it with a router, by hand, or with a thickness sander. I was fortunate to have a friend with a thickness sander, and we ran the slab through. Here it is running through the sander, which flattens it and sands it smooth on both sides. It's an enormous time saver. Once you have it sanded smooth, you want to clean up all the dead wood that's in the body of it, and you also want to remove any loose bark. I used an attachment on my angle grinder to clean up the edges and then finish sanded them. Once you have it all cleaned up, you want to mix up some deep pour epoxy and fill in all the gaps and voids. Make sure if it goes all the way through, you put some blocking on the back of it. You can see here where I tinted the epoxy and it's black coming through on the back side. I sanded it smooth. If you're going to weld the legs up yourself, go with a nice heavy gauge steel. If you're going to buy them, be careful. Many of the ones you see online are very thin and flimsy. I had a fellow I found on Etsy out of New York weld these up for me. And he did a fabulous job. They're nice and heavy duty, and he added a piece of angle iron so I could put a privacy shield in front. I'll put a link to his store down below. I put some threaded inserts in the underside of the slab so when the time came I could bolt the leg assemblies to the top of the slab. One of the potential problems on these wide live slabs is curling. They sell C-channel supports that you can buy on Amazon. I'll put a link below, and you can bolt them on to the underside of the slab at various locations, and you'll notice that the slots on them will allow the slab to expand without cracking. I took a router and recessed some slots and then placed them inside and bolted them down, again using the threaded inserts. This helps reduce the amount of cupping that occurs. I then gave the underside a couple of coats of water-based polyurethane and flipped it over to work on the top. Again, you can see here where there's a couple of scattered areas where the defects in the slab went all the way through and some of the epoxy from the bottom came through. It was sanded nice and smooth and you really can't see it. Here's the first coat of epoxy that I poured on. It gets kind of sucked into the wood and you have to put several coats on to really get a smooth layer. You want to sand it carefully between coats. As I mentioned, the first couple of coats get kind of sucked into the wood. I believe it took about 2 or 3 very thin coats, and then I finally leveled the table and did one final pour. The pour is probably about 1/8 of an inch thick. Put plastic underneath it because it tends to run off and drip on the floor, and it really can make a mess. Then I let it dry for a couple of days until the plastic became very firm. If you start handling it early, it'll absorb fingerprints. See it here the following day. It's a really smooth finish. There were still a little areas of dust in the finish, but I didn't care. I was planning on knocking down the finish and ending up with a matte finish. So what I did was I sanded it down with 220 grit, and then I used 4O steel wool with some lubricant. I use paraffin oil, but you can use water too. And that really brings out the matte finish in it. You'll see as we go along here a little bit later in the presentation. Then I turned my attention to the drawers. I made them out of 1/2-inch Baltic birch, put them on full self-closing glides. I put one pencil drawer in the center, a couple of box drawers on one side, and a file drawer on the other side. I coated them with a water-based polyurethane inside and out. In the parts you could see from the outside, I put a privacy shield in the front. I painted them with a semi-gloss black water-based finish. When you first start finishing the glossy finish to turn it into a matte finish, it looks a little scary looking. It looks almost like you've ruined the top because it gets all white and that beautiful clear finish is gone. But just keep working on it. I used a sander first with some 220 grit and some water on it, and then after that once it was all smooth like this, I wiped off all the dust, and then I went at it with some 4O steel wool with paraffin oil. I rubbed it straight back and forth in one direction along the grain and got a beautiful matte finish, which is what I was looking for. You can see it a little bit better in the subsequent pictures. One final note is to consider putting a privacy shield on the front. It helps tremendously with the racking on this desk. Well, thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them, and I'll try to answer them.